To get stronger in calisthenics, you need to do the right amount of training volume. Any less and it just won't be enough to make progress, and any more and you won't be able to recover from it. So finding your sweet spot is extremely important, and this video is designed to help you do that. But before we get into the video, I want to give you a quick disclaimer. The information here will be quite advanced, so if you're a complete beginner and just getting into calisthenics, don't get overwhelmed. You don't need to worry about all of this just yet. All you need to focus on is training hard consistently and you will make progress. And once you reach your first plateau, only then you should concern yourself with advanced training information like this. It's fine to listen to this if you're a beginner, but I just don't want you to get paralysis by analysis. Alright, let's get back to the video. But first, let's define what training volume actually is. In strength training, training volume means how much work is done in training. It's the quantity of exercises, sets, and reps, as opposed to the intensity of them. This means that the less intense an exercise is, the more volume you can do, and vice versa. To illustrate this, think about how many push-ups you can do with your body weight and how many push-ups you can do with a 20-pound backpack. You'd be able to do much more body weight push-ups than weighted push-ups because they're less intense, which means that you would be able to accumulate more training volume with them. However, keep in mind that strength is best built in the 3 to 6 rep range, which means that you have to increase the load accordingly when you feel like you can do more than 6 reps, so that you always stay in the 3 to 6 rep or 6 to 12 second range for isometrics. With that out of the way, let's talk about how to quantify training volume. There's 2 methods you can use to do it. The first is called mathematical volume, and it looks like this. Work equals sets times reps times load times distance. Work means the total training volume. Sets and reps mean how many sets and reps you do. Load means how much weight you're lifting, and distance means the amplitude through which your body is moving through. This is a very precise way to quantify volume, but I wouldn't recommend using it because it doesn't map ideally to either stimulus or fatigue. A set of 6 is much higher in mathematical volume than a set of 3, but the stimulus and fatigue of both of them is about the same. Plus, we're working out, not sitting in math class. So let's move on to the second method and skip this one entirely. The second method is called number of working sets, which basically counts the number of working sets you've done. By working sets, I mean sets that are taken above RPE 7, which means that if you can do 10 reps before hitting failure, a working set is at least 7 reps. For those who don't know, RPE means rating of perceived exertion, which rates how hard the set was on a scale of 1 to 10. This is a much better method of quantifying training volume because since every working set above RPE 7 in the 3 to 6 rep range roughly causes the same amount of stimulus and fatigue, it's really easy to compare them. Now let's talk about the 4 different volume landmarks: maintenance volume, minimum effective volume, maximal adaptive volume, and maximum recoverable volume. Maintenance volume is the amount of training you have to do to maintain your strength. Minimum effective volume is the least volume you can do that causes improvements in your strength. Maximal adaptive volume is the volume that leads to best possible gains. And maximum recoverable volume is the most volume you can recover from. So by definition, all strength training occurs between your MEV and your MRV. These landmarks change within different muscle groups, so your chest's MEV may only be your back's MEV. They're also very different from person to person, so you have to find your own, which is what I'm going to explain now. Finding them is quite a detailed process, but it'll set you up for long-term progress, so it's very important to do. Let's start with maintenance volume, which is the amount of training you have to do to maintain your strength. To find your MV, pick a relatively low weekly volume in a specific movement pattern, for example pushing, and examine your strength before the mesocycle and after the deload of that mesocycle. If it declined, it was under your MV. If it stayed the same, it was around your MV, but if it improved, it was at or over your MEV. MV is a range, so you should stay at the low end of that range to pay the lowest fatigue cost for maintaining your strength. To find the low end, decrease the volume even more for the next mesocycle and see if you're still maintaining your strength. If you are, then you found the low end of your MV range, but if you aren't, you were at the low end before. Finding your MV is extremely important for advanced athletes because since they're so strong, they accumulate a ton of fatigue, so to continue progressing, they need to focus just on one movement pattern and put all the others on the back burner. Otherwise, they wouldn't progress at all, or even worse, just break in half from the fatigue. Knowing your MV is also important if you're going on a vacation or you just have a period of time where you can devote as much time to working out, but you don't want to lose any strength or muscle. Next up is minimum effective volume, which is the least volume you can do that causes improvements in your strength. To find your MEV, pick a moderate volume in a specific movement pattern, for example pulling, and examine your strength before the mesocycle and after the deload of that mesocycle. If it declined or stayed the same, it was under your MEV, but if it improved, it was at or over your MEV. If it improved, next time you do an MEV detection cycle, try going a bit lower to see if you still improve. If you don't, then your MEV is probably between this estimate and the last one. Finding your MEV is quite important because it offers super low fatiguing gains, but most people miss this golden window of easy gains because they simply overestimate where their MEV is. Next up is maximal adaptive volume, which is the volume that leads to best possible gains. The most seemingly straightforward way to find your MAV would be to look at which mesocycle produced the most gains, but it's a bit trickier than that because strength gains are asymptotic, which means that as you get stronger, the strength gains become smaller, so you can't just look at the mesocycle that produced the most gains and say that that was your MAV. This means that if you can repeat or even improve a past mesocycle strength strength gains. This mesocycle's volume is closer to your MAV than the previous ones because you were predicted to get less gains since you're stronger. So to find your MAV, experiment with different amounts of volume per mesocycle and examine how much you improved. If your strength gains were similar or even better than in the previous mesocycle, you're closer to your MAV now than you were before. This experiment should be done over a year to get a really good glimpse on how much volume you need to improve optimally. And last up is maximum recoverable volume, which is the most volume you can recover from. To find your MRV, experiment by slowly raising your average weekly volume and seeing if your performance stalls before deloading. If it doesn't, you can add more volume in the next cycle. The only difference here is that you don't need to examine your strength after the deload like with all the other volume landmarks. You just need to find the volume that stalls your performance. Keep in mind that fatigue will bring your MRV down to you no matter what your volume is, as long as it's above your MEV. If it didn't, you would have found a way of getting stronger forever, but sadly, that's not possible. Also remember that the MRV you want to find must be tailored to your preferred accumulation/deload paradigm. This means that if you plan to train for 4 weeks before taking a deload, you have to hit your MRV at the end of the 4th week for the mesocycle to be most effective. If at the end of week 4 you can still do another week and hit PRs, you obviously aren't at your MRV, so you can continue the cycle until your performance stalls and increase the volume in the next cycle. On the other hand, if you're absolutely drained in week 3 and can't imagine training for another week, you've hit MRV early because you overshot your volume and can reduce it in the next cycle. The main goal here is to reach MRV on the last week of your mesocycle. There's 2 main constraints that you need to work within when training for strength. The first constraint is that you need to go from RPE 7 to RPE 10 in your mesocycle, which means that the first week needs to be around 70% of your max effort and the last week needs to be 100% of your max effort. There's 4 reasons for this. If you start below RPE 7, you won't see almost any improvements in strength because the intensity is just not there. If you start above RPE 7, you'll accumulate too much fatigue early in the mesocycle and skip easy gains. If you end below RPE 10, you will leave gains on the table. But if you go to RPE 10 for longer than 1 week, you'll accumulate a crap ton of fatigue for not much stimulus. The second constraint is your mesocycle's length. If it's very long, for example 8 weeks, then you can only increase the load by a little bit each week. But if it's very short, for example 3 weeks, then you can increase the load by a lot each week. That's because the main goal is to hit MRV right at the end of it. If you increase the load too quickly, you will hit MRV too early. But if you increase the load too slowly, you will end the mesocycle before hitting your MRV, and both are not optimal. Taking these both constraints into account, we can conclude that each week of an accumulation phase needs to have an RPE target. If you have a 4-week long accumulation phase, first week's target will be RPE 7, second week's target will be RPE 8, third week's target will be RPE 9, and fourth week's target will be RPE 10. Now that you have RPE targets to hit each week, you can adjust the load and volume to try to hit them, while making sure that you stay in the 3 to 6 rep or 6 to 12 second range. I like to move from the lower to the higher end of these ranges and only then increase the load, but you can also stay in the middle, for example 5 reps or 9 seconds, and progress only by increasing the load. If you choose the first option, you can add reps and seconds every week to hit your RPE targets, and once you reach 6 reps or 12 seconds, you can increase the load and repeat this process. But if you choose the second option, you could stay at 5 reps or 9 seconds and hit your RPE targets by increasing the load every week. You can increase the load of an exercise in 2 ways, by either adding weight to your body or decreasing the leverage. This means that if you're doing pull-ups, you can increase the load by simply adding weight to your body. But if you're doing the advanced tuck planche, you can increase the load by extending your legs a little bit further and increasing the torque on the shoulder, or just by wearing ankle weights. Now that I've explained everything about increasing the load through a mesocycle, let's talk about what role volume plays. If you do too much volume, you might not maximize load progression because volume contributes to fatigue. For example, if you did 8 sets of pull-ups 2 times per week, you'd be able to go up only by 5 pounds every week to hit your RPE target. But if you did only 4 sets, you'd be able to go up by 10 pounds. Even though you're doing less volume, you're able to increase the load much more, which is the main point of strength training. Never sacrifice load progression for volume. For hypertrophy it's okay, but not for strength. Conversely, if you do too little volume, you might cut load progression short for no reason. For example, if you did only 2 sets, you would also be able to go up by 10 pounds every week, but you wouldn't hit MRV on your last week because you're not accumulating as much fatigue. This means that you'd be basically leaving potential progression in the tank for no reason. Even though you progressed in load quite a lot in this mesocycle, you actually didn't get much stronger because you were doing so little volume that you were under your MEV the whole time and didn't accumulate any fatigue. Strength and fatigue go hand in hand, so if you're not accumulating fatigue by staying below your MEV, you're not getting stronger even though you're increasing the load during a mesocycle. What matters most is how strong you're getting from one mesocycle to the next, not through the mesocycle. Now let's talk about how progression through a mesocycle looks like in practice. First, you begin at your estimated MEV volumes. Let's say it's 10 sets per week. Then you run a mesocycle of your chosen length and add load to go from RPE 7 to RPE 10, not increasing the volume, and see how fatigued you are at the end of your last week. If you're completely beat up and couldn't have progressed after it, then congrats. Your load progression brought you all the way up to your MRV and you don't have to change the volume. If you're still fresh and think you could have beaten or at least matched this performance, increase the volume throughout your next mesocycle by 1 to 2 sets per week, and repeat the previous steps until you found a volume progression that makes sure you hit MRV on the last week every time. This is how a productive strength cycle should look like. You start at MEV and end at MRV, mostly by letting the load increases take you there. You can add a set or two during the cycle, but you won't be able to do this for long because as you become more advanced, you will hit MRV with lower and lower set additions. And after the additions drop to 0, load increments alone will take you from MEV to MRV. This means that the number of sets in the first and last week will be the same. The only difference between the two is that in the last week, you've accumulated a crap ton of fatigue and you're lifting more load. When you get to this point, your MAV is basically a known number of sets, and load is the only change you have to concern yourself with. So strength training becomes simpler the stronger you become. Fun fact, ultra advanced athletes may even need to lower the number of sets through the mesocycle to ensure that they don't hit MRV before the last week, since the load that they're lifting is so fatiguing. A really important thing that you need to know about all of these volume landmarks is that over time, they will change. Your MAV 3 years from now won't be the same as it is right now, but by tracking performance alterations over each mesocycle, you can reanalyze your landmarks continuously. Also know that as you get stronger, your MV will shrink, so play with lowering a bit every now and again when you have the chance. If you happen to lower it too much and lose strength, don't worry, regaining lost strength is much easier than gaining it for the first time. Now let's talk about some rough weekly estimates of volume landmarks per muscle group for intermediates, so that you have at least some idea of where to start. MV is around 2 to 6 sets, MEV is around 4 to 12 sets, MAV is around 6 to 18 sets, and MRV is around 8 to 24 sets. These ranges are so large that they probably don't mean anything to you, but that's because they completely depend on the person and the exercise you're doing, so you have to experiment and find them out for yourself. And lastly, let's talk about some mistakes that people make training volume-wise. The first mistake is assuming that their MV is higher than it is. A ton of people make this mistake because they just can't believe that they can maintain their strength with just 2 to 6 sets per week. This becomes a problem as you reach the advanced stages, because to really make significant progress in an exercise, you will have to put all the other exercises on maintenance. But if you overestimate where your MV is, you will just end up paying a higher fatigue cost for maintaining them and making less progress in the exercise that you want to focus on. The second mistake is assuming your MEV is higher than it is. This is just like the previous mistake because people always tend to believe that more is better. Imagine that you're a sushi connoisseur and you've never eaten a sushi roll that's under $20 because you believe that it'll taste like crap. Then one day your friend gives you a $10 sushi roll and you decide to try it out. You're mind blown by how good it tastes and wonder why you spent so much money on $20 sushi rolls when you could have saved money and eaten $10 sushi rolls that taste almost just as good instead. The price of the sushi rolls is the volume and the taste of them is the strength gains. What a tragedy would it be to discover that you can do half as much volume as you're doing now and still make good gains. Sadly, most people are in this situation right now because they just haven't invested their time into finding their MEV. The third mistake is never finding your MRV. The problem with this is that you might be leaving a crazy amount of gains on the table because you're simply not pushing your body to the limits. And the fourth mistake is trying to raise your MRV at all costs. I'm assuming that people who do this believe that the higher their MRV is, the cooler they are. What these people fail to recognize is that strength is volume sensitive, and lower volumes usually lead to best strength results. For strength, your goal is not to do as much volume as possible. Your goal is to increase the load, so never sacrifice load progression for volume progression. We've covered a lot of stuff in this video, so before you go, I want to give you a quick summary of everything we talked about. Firstly, training volume means how much work is done in training. Secondly, the way we quantify it is by counting the number of working sets. Thirdly, there are 4 different volume landmarks: MV or maintenance volume, MEV or minimum effective volume, MAV or maximal adaptive volume, and MRV or maximum recoverable volume. Fourthly, strength is built by staying in the MAV to MRV range. Fifthly, strength isn't built by increasing the volume, it's built by increasing the load, and volume is increased only to ensure that you hit MRV when you're supposed to, so never sacrifice load progression for volume progression. Sixthly, every one of your mesocycles should start at your MEV in RPE 7 and end at your MRV in RPE 10. And seventhly, the best volume is one that results in the greatest post-deload gains. This was a lot of information. I covered basically everything that you need to know about training volume for strength gains, and I really hope that this video was useful to you. I poured a lot of time into this video, so I would really appreciate it if you could leave a like, share it with someone who could benefit from it as well, and leave a comment down below about future video ideas that I should consider. You can also check the description for the best 9 bodyweight exercises for beginners and my Instagram, where I post my daily workouts and my lifestyle in general. Other than that, make sure to have an awesome day. Peace!